It's amazing that these three men were even able to get out of the prison complex itself. Alcatraz had the reputation of being the most secure prison in the country.
Alcatraz was supposed to be flawless. The cold water, the currents, and the heavy concrete were meant to make escape impossible.
Even if you do get out of Alcatraz, you still have to contend with 6 watchtowers as well as a 20-foot fence with barbed wire. And if by some miracle you make it over that as well, you still are dealing with the dark and turbulent waters of the San Francisco Bay.
For years, everyone believed the island had no weak points. But scientists have now uncovered a secret escape room hidden inside the prison.
The currents and strong tides made escape from the prison impossible. But for 55 years, a mystery has lingered. Did 3 inmates actually escape and survive?
A room no blueprint shows. A room no guard ever reported.
One of the key items for their escape, they learned how to make from literature that was in the prison.
Right in their hand. It was like a handbook for escape.
It's unbelievable.
And its discovery changes everything we thought we knew about Alcatraz. The myth of the inescapable fortress. Alcatraz did not begin as a simple solution to crime. It was created to end the conversation entirely.
Alcatraz is the brand known around the world for being effective at housing people that are in incarceration.
From the moment the federal government chose a lonely island in the middle of San Francisco Bay, the goal was clear. This place was meant to erase every possibility of escape. Cold water surrounded it on all sides. Dense fog rolled in without warning. The current shifted direction with no pattern that made sense to the human mind. The prison administration even required inmates to bathe in hot water so they never adapted to the freezing temperature of the bay that waited outside the walls. Anyone standing on the mainland and looking toward the island understood the warning without needing an explanation. Alcatraz was built to end hope long before it ended freedom. Its reputation did not appear by chance. Before the first federal prisoner ever stepped onto the island, Alcatraz had already served as a military stronghold. The U.S. Army armed it with heavy cannons, built thick defensive walls, and cut service tunnels into the bedrock to move soldiers and supplies. When the government later transformed the site into a maximum security prison, it did not remove any of those earlier structures. It used them as the base. The new cell blocks were placed directly on top of the old fort, which created a prison made of 2 different eras fused together. Inside those walls, control shaped daily life. The prison layout placed guards on elevated walkways where they could watch every cell block without obstruction. Former inmates often recalled the constant noise of the building. Boots striking metal floors, heavy doors closing, voices echoing through the corridors. These sounds reminded prisoners that they were always being observed. The design offered almost no privacy. It created pressure that affected both the body and the mind. The world beyond the island helped strengthen this image. Newspapers described Alcatraz as the toughest prison in the country. Radio programs repeated stories about its harsh conditions. Films used it as the ultimate symbol of punishment. Government officials reinforced this reputation every time they addressed the public. The Department of Justice echoed the same message, assuring citizens that prisoners sent to Alcatraz had no practical or survivable route off the island. With every announcement and every press briefing, the idea solidified. Alcatraz was not only secure, it was untouchable. That belief became even stronger after a major incident in 1962. 3 inmates vanished during the night, and authorities announced almost immediately that the men had drowned in the bay. According to those early statements, the water would have defeated them long before they reached land. With that conclusion, the reputation of the prison remained unchanged. Yet the physical structure of the island did not always match the simple story told to the public. Workers assigned to maintenance duties noticed unusual features. Some walls had hollow echoes that did not match the blueprints. Certain sealed doors appeared to lead nowhere. In later years, researchers pointed out that several updates to the prison were never documented properly. According to some accounts, parts of the island had been closed off during the military era and then forgotten. These inconsistencies did not prove anything on their own, but they created a small disturbance beneath the surface of the legend. If certain areas of the building had been overlooked for decades, what else had gone unnoticed? Modern technology turned that quiet disturbance into something that no one could ignore. Advanced scanning tools allowed scientists to examine the interior of the island without damaging a single wall. The results showed a facility that was more complex and layered than the public had ever been told. Alcatraz began to look less like a flawless fortress and more like an old structure filled with forgotten spaces. As the scans exposed these hidden spaces, one detail became impossible to ignore. If modern equipment could detect weaknesses buried inside the structure, then someone living inside those walls might have noticed them too. And if anyone had the focus and patience to find those openings long before the scanners did, it was a prisoner who refused to accept the limits set for him. Frank Morris, the mind built for escape. Frank Morris entered Alcatraz with a background that immediately drew attention from the staff. He had a long record of institutions that struggled to contain him, and officials were well aware that he was not a typical inmate. Prison documents reported an intelligence level that placed him far above most of the population.
Each of these guys had to tunnel out of their cell.
Right. A small ventilation grate in it.
But they had to widen that.
They had to widen it.
This was not a man who relied on strength or intimidation. He relied on thought and calculation. To the administration, that alone made him a different kind of risk. Before arriving at Alcatraz, Morris had already proven that he could study a system and exploit it. His escape from the Louisiana State Penitentiary showed that he was capable of careful planning. That earlier escape shaped how officers viewed him once he was assigned Alcatraz. It encouraged them to keep him under close watch, although some later accounts suggest that they underestimated how much information he was absorbing. According to official reports from that time, he did not rush decisions or act on impulse. He waited, watched patterns in staff behavior, and acted only when he believed the odds were in his favor. Inside Alcatraz, Morris developed a routine that did not disrupt the prison environment. He stayed disciplined and avoided unnecessary conflict. Former inmates later described him as someone who paid close attention to the movement of the institution. He watched how guards circulated through the cell blocks and how long each patrol lasted. He noted when lights changed and which doors opened at certain times. He treated the daily structure of the prison as information rather than routine. His focus was not limited to people. Some researchers believe he also observed the physical behavior of the building. He noticed echoes in specific sections of the corridor. He paid attention to air movement near vents and grills. According to some inmate accounts, he took interest in structural inconsistencies that others ignored. These details might have seemed unimportant to someone who saw Alcatraz as an unbreakable environment. Morris saw them as signals that the building was not as uniform as it appeared. He also recognized parts of the facility that seemed out of place. Certain vents looked older or more eroded than the surrounding walls. Some maintenance features appeared mismatched with the official layout. A few former inmates claimed that Morris quietly asked about repair histories or unused areas. These observations indicated that he was forming a broader understanding of the prison's internal structure. Even if each detail seemed harmless on its own, together they suggested that he was mapping the building mentally. Morris eventually connected with two inmates who shared his sense of discipline. John and Clarence Anglin came from earlier institutions where they had shown persistence and patience. Interviews with people who knew them described the brothers as determined individuals who respected careful planning. As they spent more time around Morris, a focused partnership began to form. It was not a loud or public alliance. It developed in a controlled and purposeful way. When the three men began working together, Morris organized their efforts with a method that appeared intentional. He directed each person toward specific responsibilities. One concentrated on gathering materials. Another focused on shaping or modifying tools. Someone else monitored guard behavior during the quiet hours of the night. Morris's goal was not to challenge Alcatraz directly. It was to understand where it was weak. By the time the escape took shape, Morris had turned months of attention into a structured plan. He could recognize openings where others saw barriers. He could identify patterns that most inmates accepted without question. Yet even with that level of insight, a plan of this size needed a hidden location where preparation could happen without detection. Finding such a space required more than intelligence. It required access to a part of the prison that was never meant to be reached by any inmate. Engineering the impossible.
Escape attempts from Alcatraz. None of them succeeded. Prisoners were either shot on sight, caught, or drowned.
Once Morris and the Anglin brothers understood how Alcatraz moved, the plan shifted from watching to acting. They already knew when guards passed, when the block settled into silence, and when noise from other inmates could hide their own movements. Observation had given them timing. What they needed next was a way to use that timing to get out of their cells without attracting attention. The difficulty was obvious. Each cell was enclosed by thick concrete on 3 sides, and the front was nothing but open bars facing the corridor. Any attempt to work openly would be seen instantly. The only possible starting point was the small ventilation grill set into the back wall, and even that required caution. According to investigators who later studied the scene, years of moisture from the bay had eaten into the concrete in that area. Morris saw that softening as the one place where the prison had not kept up with its own reputation. To reach that weakness, they relied on objects that would not immediately attract suspicion. Items from the prison workshop, the dining area, and other work details were altered to serve a new purpose. Spoons were used to scrape and chip. Small metal fragments became cutting edges. Parts from a damaged vacuum cleaner were reportedly turned into a simple drill. According to accounts of the escape, they worked quietly and removed only small amounts of concrete at a time so that dust and fragments did not build up. During the day, they covered the opening with a painted piece of cardboard that matched the wall around the vent. To a guard walking past, the cell appeared unchanged. Behind those vents lay a narrow utility corridor that followed the line of the cell block. It was designed for maintenance, not for regular traffic. Workers entered it only when something needed repair, which meant that long periods passed with no one inspecting it. For the trio, the corridor offered something more immediate. It gave them a concealed space where they could move at night without standing in open view on the main floor. It also confirmed that there were parts of the building that normal security routines did not touch. As they explored further, the men realized that the space above this corridor held even more potential. They managed to reach an upper area that had once been used to store supplies. It sat above the main line of sight and away from regular patrol routes. According to comments from former workers, this upper room had not been checked in any serious way for years. Inside that neglected space, the plan expanded. Here they could stay longer without immediate risk. They began to construct what they would need for the final phase. They stitched raincoats together to form larger sheets. They tested sealing methods by using heat from nearby steam pipes. They shaped pieces of wood into paddles. This was the place where tools stopped being theory and became equipment. Their repeated trips between the cells, the corridor, and the upper room revealed something that struck investigators later. Alcatraz, which had been presented as fully controlled, contained areas that staff did not fully account for in practice. Guards believed that their positions and patrols covered every important angle. The fact that 3 inmates could move through storage and service spaces at night without detection showed that the prison structure had more blind spots than anyone admitted at the time. Some researchers have suggested that these blind spots existed because the prison had been built in stages over different eras, leaving small gaps between sections that were easy to overlook on paper. By the time their workshop in the upper space was active, the escape was no longer a theory. It had become a functioning route that moved behind and above the monitored parts of the prison. Yet even with all they had uncovered, this pathway still relied on areas that appeared somewhere in the official layout, even if they were rarely used. Investigators who revisited the site years later began to notice something that did not fit within those known spaces. Their findings suggested that another part of the building existed close to the route the men used, a part that had never been documented clearly. At the time, no one understood what that meant. Only modern technology would reveal what was actually hidden inside that section of the island. The hidden escape room. The concern surrounding that unexplained section of the prison turned into something far more serious when a modern LiDAR scan was carried out on Alcatraz. The scan was meant only to update the digital model of the island. It was not designed to solve mysteries. Yet when the data reached the area near the old service corridor, the team froze. The software showed a rectangular cavity behind a stained structural wall. For decades, that wall had been dismissed as simple aging, but the scan indicated a sealed space large enough for work, storage, and movement. This was not a crack or a flaw. It was a hidden room that no blueprint had ever acknowledged. Engineers began comparing the digital model to every record they could find. They checked federal prison plans, military diagrams from the island's early years, and renovation documents. The cavity appeared in none of them. According to several specialists, a room with no history on paper usually means one of two things. Either it was created during undocumented construction, or it was intentionally removed from every official record. When researchers finally cut an opening into the wall, what they found ruled out the idea of a forgotten storage space. The interior showed signs of activity. Rusted anchor points marked the concrete in positions that aligned with repeated tension from ropes or pulleys. The floor pushed the discovery even further. Investigators collected fibers that testing later linked to raincoat rubber and rope, the same materials used in the raft. Beneath one of the support beams, a darkened patch spread outward in a pattern consistent with repeated exposure to heat. Some researchers believe this mark came from softening seams, testing patches or warming materials before sealing them. Metal shavings recovered from cracks in the floor matched improvised tool fragments already associated with the escape. Then came the detail that changed the entire story of Alcatraz. The room sat directly along the escape path mapped for Morris and the Anglin brothers. It was positioned in a way that linked the men to a hidden workspace that no guard ever reported, and no document ever mentioned. That connection does not simply raise doubt about the drowning story. It forces the entire narrative to shift. Because if the escapees had access to a private workshop that the prison itself did not know existed, then every assumption about their limitations collapses. This room does not challenge the official story, it breaks it. The official story crumbles. Evidence authorities ignored. From the first days afterward, items appeared that did not sit comfortably with the simple drowning story. Pieces of a homemade raft were recovered in locations that fit a deliberate route rather than a random struggle. Those landing points matched a likely path toward shore, not a drift into open water. Together with what was uncovered inside the prison, these finds became far more difficult to dismiss. A wallet linked to the Anglin family caused similar problems. It was found wrapped in plastic, with photographs and personal details preserved inside. Officials at the time presented it as proof that the escape attempt failed and that the men lost control of their belongings. Others have argued that the condition of the wallet suggests an effort to protect its contents rather than an act of panic. After raincoat fragments and rope fibers were discovered in the hidden room, that wallet began to look less like random debris and more like part of a planned operation. Inside Alcatraz, warning signs had also been present. Former officers later spoke about unexplained noises from inside the walls that were written off as plumbing or shifting pipes. A guard admitted that certain service areas were rarely inspected because the layout there was confusing. Maintenance workers who raised concerns about sealed voids under the block were reportedly told that the structures were old and irrelevant. The paper trail added more questions. Logs from the weeks before the escape recorded an unusual number of raincoats going out of service. Even so, the entries did not lead to stronger checks, although raincoats later appeared in the construction of the raft. Early FBI memos released much later show that not everyone inside the investigation agreed with the drowning conclusion. Each clue by itself could have been ignored. Together, they created a pattern the official narrative never addressed. The story of a guaranteed drowning was already struggling to stand on its own, and it would not survive what came next. Because when researchers finally examined the bay with real data, the foundation of the official story continued to break apart for good. Nature was never the enemy. Researchers used detailed tidal simulations to recreate the conditions of that June night in 1962. They fed historical tide tables, wind records, and current data into modern models. The results surprised many who had grown up hearing that the currents always pulled away from land. According to these simulations, there was a window between about 11:30 at night and midnight when the water did something very different. During that period, the currents inside the bay tended to move toward Angel Island and the marine shoreline. In other words, if a small craft left Alcatraz at the right time, the water would not drag it out to sea. It would help push it toward land. Water temperature had been used as another argument against survival. The bay in early summer is cold and unforgiving. However, studies of similar conditions showed that a person using flotation gear and basic insulation could remain functional for a significant amount of time. The escapees did not plan to swim the full distance without support. According to reports, they built a raft and life vests from raincoats, which would have kept much of their bodies above the direct chill. Modern open-water swimmers have since crossed the same route in comparable temperatures. Some organized events have timed and recorded these crossings, proving that the distance itself is within human limits when preparation is involved. The way debris moved after the escape also tells a story. Oceanographers examined where pieces of the raft and other items were later found. According to those analyses, the drift pattern matched objects released from a craft that stayed relatively stable before reaching points near Angel Island and the Marin Headlands. This supported the idea of a controlled crossing rather than a panicked struggle that broke apart in mid-bay. Wind records from that night, as reported by historical weather data, suggest that breezes pushed from the southwest, which would have favored a path toward the northern shore instead of out through the Golden Gate. The most unsettling part comes when this science is placed beside the evidence from inside the prison. Some sea researchers state that notes recovered from the escapees' workshop and from the hidden chamber appear to follow tidal behaviors that match the modern simulations. Simple marks on the wall and crude charts reportedly line up with the best launch window that the models later identified. If those interpretations are accurate, then Morris and the Anglin brothers were not guessing. They were timing their escape to work with the bay, not against it. Taken together, the simulations, the debris analysis, the recorded swims, and the suspected tide charts point in a single direction. The natural environment that officials once used as proof of certain death now looks like a force that could be managed and even used. Survival on that route was not some remote miracle. It was a realistic outcome for a prepared group that understood timing. And if survival was realistic, then the accounts that began to surface after 1962 suddenly deserve far more attention than they were ever given. After the bay. Once science weakened the claim that the bay guaranteed death, attention turned to a harder question. If Morris and the Anglin brothers could have reached land, did anything ever surface to prove it? According to members of the Anglin family, unsettling signs did appear in the years after 1962. They spoke of unsigned postcards that arrived on birthdays and holidays, written in a style that sounded familiar to them. Some relatives also reported short phone calls on important dates. The caller never gave a name, but the voice and private phrases reminded them of the brothers they remembered. None of this can be confirmed today. Yet inside the family, it kept the belief alive that the story might not have ended in the bay. Years later, a single photograph pushed the debate beyond that household. In the 1970s, an image surfaced that seemed to show two men on a small farm in Brazil. To many viewers, they looked very similar to John and Clarence Anglin. For a long time, the picture circulated as a rumor without consequence. Then, according to reports, modern facial analysis software compared the faces with known images of the brothers and found a strong match. The result did not settle the case, but it encouraged some investigators and reporters to treat the survival theory as something that deserved serious consideration. While the public argued about postcards, calls, and photographs, other voices came from closer to Alcatraz. A former inmate claimed late in life that he had been invited to join the escape but refused because he believed the attempt was certain death. One small boat operator stated that he had been paid in cash to wait offshore near Angel Island on the night of the escape, with instructions to say nothing about his role. Maintenance workers added their own fragments. Some recalled passageways they were instructed not to enter. Others reported hearing movement behind walls that were supposed to be solid concrete. Later, several scholars suggested that the hidden escape room may have started as part of an older military tunnel system and was simply left off later plans. None of these accounts prove anything on their own. But when viewed alongside the chamber, the tide studies, and the debris linked to the escape, they point in the same direction. The official explanation no longer answers every question. If Morris and the Anglin brothers escaped, then who else might have? Share your thoughts in the comments.